Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey, ladies and gents, welcome back to the Future Supply Chain Podcast. I'm your host, Santosh Sankar, and rejoining me today is David Nothacker, co-founder and CEO of Dynamo portfolio company, sennder. Welcome back, David.
Thank you, Santosh, for having me again.
Absolutely. And you know, I will say it's been a couple years since you last joined us. And with that, I thought it would just be great to remind our audience here what you and the team at sennder are building. So, would love kind of the quick 2-minute overview.
Sure. So technically, we are a digital freight broker, the market leader in Europe. You can think of us as an Uber Freight or convoy of Europe. Let's use the Uber Freight maybe analogy.
That's
We're
right.
Maybe discuss about convoy and what happened there later on in the podcast. So we connect large enterprise shippers such as Coca-Cola with small family-owned trucking companies, and we optimize the entire process flow decision making based on data. We're now 1,000 employees here in Germany, here in Europe with 11 offices. The headquarters is here in Germany in Berlin. Have also raised some money to support mostly our tech development, and have the Volkswagen VW Group as largest shareholder, and the Italian Post, which is the equivalent of USPS in Italy, second largest shareholders, and both of them are strategic partners. Maybe we're going to talk about that as well later.
Amazing indeed. And you know, the audience here is not as close to the European freight market obviously as you are, and I think it would be beneficial to just give a sense of what has happened around European freight over the last 5 years or so through COVID and then kind of to present, if you would.
Sure. So road freight is road freight. So a lot of dynamics are very similar in Europe, and comparable to what you saw in the US. There are, however, some differences. One interesting aspect of road freight that demand and supply really determine the dynamics that you see in this industry. On the demand side, I think there's more similarities to the US. The market softened, people spend less gets produced, less needs to be moved. We definitely felt that. But the supply side, the carrier side, the trucking side, this is where I think there's some differences to the US. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 2022 was the year the US saw the highest registration of owner operators, with a lot of supply coming online, something that in Europe did not happen. Two main reasons. First of all, because Europe does not have a lot of owner operators, it's mostly small family-owned businesses, meaning that starting a company and going live is not as easy and straightforward as it is in the US. And the second big differentiator is what happened with the Ukraine war. Almost 10% of all truck drivers in Europe came from either Ukraine or Russia. And with the beginning of the war, a lot of truck drivers literally just parked the trucks on the side of the road, either dropped the key at the gas station or just left it on a wheel and took a bus back home. So the supply side in Europe developed in a different way, meaning that as demand decreased a little bit, softened a bit, and supply also softened and went down a little bit, we didn't see this volatility in terms of both prices and let's say effects on the industry, the road freight industry, as we did in the US.
Amazing. And so kind of how would you define where the freight industry is today in Europe? Obviously, COVID very much characterized by high demand, rising volumes, rising rates. How should people think about the current state of the market?
It's still kind of an unstable situation. Everyone is kind of a little bit of waiting. We do not see the recovery yet in Europe. I think the US is ahead a little bit on that front. There's some European countries such as Spain that are developing really, really well, but there are other big economies such as Germany that are struggling big time at the moment. So there are, let's say, mixed signals, but it's still everyone is kind of waiting. What we see is that the cleanup on the carrier side that maybe the US experienced in 2023 following this unbalanced demand supply setup is something that slowly we're seeing also here in Europe. There's a lot of small trucking companies that really struggle to survive. Over the past few months, they've been operating effectively at a loss and without always realizing it. And it's something that they're realizing right now. So this balancing out of, again, demand and supply is something that we see now in Europe. And this is why already in January we saw an increase in rates on the carrier side, which was unexpected, which is probably the result of this rebalancing happening right now.
Yeah. So you mentioned, 2023 softness. What key decisions did you and your management team ultimately undertake through the course of that year?
Yeah, we realized how important diversification was, and we were very lucky that early already in 2023, probably in 2022, we started moving away from having a focus on spot uh, transaction, where probably the marketplace principle of a digital freight broker makes the most sense, to more the contracted side, and we took it even a level further. We call it Send Control, which is, let's say, our solution whereby we take 100% of a shipper's food truck load business for certain warehouse, geography, business unit, or the entire, let's say, food truck load needs, and giving us both the contract load, the base load that have to be moved no matter whether the sun shines or not, as well as the spot business. We started this in Italy for the Italian Post, which is also a major shareholder, where we run 100% of all the parcel and mail business on the long distance. Long distance along that is a 200 million business and running very profitably. And we took that and evolved it in this control tower setup. And this is something that in 2023 we expanded significantly. Almost 50% of our business is now under the setup, which allowed us to stabilize very much the growth, and also allows now shippers to benefit much more from the insights that we're able to provide, because once we have 100% of a wallet share for a warehouse, for example, a dynamic ETA can really help to optimize the slot management. If you're just one of 20, 30 brokers or providers that load and unload in a specific warehouse, bringing this visibility and transparency does not really make a difference, because the 90 something percent of the loads don't have this visibility. And so through this diversification in 2023, we really were able to still grow very strongly, even in a very soft market.
And, when we talk about 2023, it's hard to ignore Convoy going belly up late last year. There's also been, within the European brokerage market, Instacart has run into issues themselves. How's that kind of influenced how you're pulling the different levers around strategy? Because you mentioned profitability. Clearly, that's top of mind these days. But I'd be kind of curious your take, because that's a lot to digest in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, Convoy and Instafreight are, let's say, two examples that, in my opinion, show how, first of all, how difficult road freight business is per se, but also how much scale matters. And my take on the situation is the strongest get stronger because of the volume, the network effects that are being seen right now, and the weaker get weaker, and specifically in an environment where the cost of capital is so high, they struggled to keep financing their operations, and therefore became so weak that they had to close down. And we see, I mentioned Italy already for the earlier. This is where we really see how the volume concentration in a specific geography just makes such a big difference. We're fully profitable in Italy, and it's really fun to see how our operation really worked there. in a very much automated way, and where the value to both shippers and carriers is extremely high. We use that playbook and are now replicating that in the rest of the European Union. And these control tower setups that we're expanding also this year will hopefully allow us to get much faster to this volume density in multiple geographies to see all of these positive effects that we see in Italy.
Mm. So I guess with that, kind of what's your baseline outlook for 2024? Is it kind of leaning more into what sounds here in the US, the analog would be kind of this managed transportation capability you've developed that's providing you a lot of scale, but also stability around margin and volumes?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is gonna stay a focus for us in 2024, as probably as the spot market will remain very soft, at least for the first part of the year. You can think about these control tower setups as managed trade, with one big difference is that we are both the contracting party on both the shipper and the carrier side, and we also take the risk. And meaning that we typically agree on a rate, but most of the times is saving for the shippers with respect to the prices that they paid until that point. We then bring the suppliers, the carriers, the brokers to a certain degree under the sennder umbrella with a discounted price and start optimizing and bring in all the visibility that helps optimize things such as accessorials, waiting times, and a lot of other minor cost points that can make a big difference when added up. And as mentioned, that's let's say our definition of control tower, and something that we will be keeping a strong focus on this year.
Hmm. So I'm going to push ahead here. The big criticism of the digital freight brokerage model here in the US, at least, is that historically, um, these platforms substituted margin with venture capital. And as we were reflecting internally as a team, the one thing that came to us is that's not necessarily been the case with sennder. You're brokering at profitable margins. Even at the early days, I remember this exercise when the seed was done around kind of how can you grow share by reducing margin and thoughtfully bringing it back up to something that is sustainable. But kind of walk us through that, because I think that's the one thing I do want people to recognize, that not all digital freight brokerage is, Uber Freight in the early days or even Convoy in the early days. You can actually do this with healthy margin.
Yeah, and that's something I'm very proud of. From day one, we really focus on having profitable business and ensuring that throughout our growth, we kept it positive and expanded it year over year as we create this volume density, this optimization, and also better understanding of the market, the pricing, and the optimization opportunities. Now the question still is, okay, why did you still raise money to do that? And the answer to that is twofold. On one side, we're investing a third, even more, of our, let's say, resources or budget in developing the technology. And so this is a main focus area. And the second thing that we are focused on is building this pan-European player. And so we've been always very profitable, but every time we open a new market, it takes months now. It used to take maybe 2 years until we get to industry average profitability levels. And in order to push something that again was profitable to be even more profitable, is where we also invested part of the capital that we raised.
Amazing. And I guess let's lean into that, because I've over the last quarter or so revisited the brokerage business, and it's more obvious than ever. One of the dynamics of this type of business is that the market tends to dictate your margin, right, as a function of volumes and rates, and therefore it puts almost a limit as you look at being self-sustaining on where you can invest, whether it's in technology or frankly anything else, equally OpEx, let's call it. VC can supplement the former. That's what you've decided to do with the team, and doing it thoughtfully at that. But I'd be curious, kind of, as you think about the application of technology and your approach at Sennder, are there certain things that you're leaning in on as you think back to your seed days? Are there things maybe you've leaned on a bit more or done differently as it relates to technology inside of a digital freight broker?
Yes, there's one big learning. It's not only about developing the technology, but it's also about, or is also about making sure that the technology is used. And this is something that, yeah, it's maybe difficult to understand for digital natives, but in Europe, it's not easy to ensure that, especially the carrier side, uses our app, that the dispatcher sitting in an office use our platform to manage the entire business. And the same thing on the shipper side. It's not easy to convince large enterprise shippers to open up their system and push all of the order information through an API if you're one of 20, one of 30 providers that want to do that. And so we really realized how important the focus on tech adoption is. And that's why we decided that the brokerage part of our business model, or the flywheel model, is the focus area for the first few years. In the next 1 or 2 years, once we have established a very strong flywheel in the brokerage business, having strong relationship with both shippers and carriers, and specifically with carriers have pushed tech adoption through a business that they already know. They're just doing it differently now. And we are expanding into first services. Think about fuel cards and also factoring services. And then later on, once that part is developed, we envision also going more into the software and allowing small carriers to manage the entire business on a single platform. Now, let me add some color to that. There's one thing that we learned is that cash flow is a big challenge for small family-owned trucking companies.
Yep.
This is why we launched a pilot already 18 months ago, whereby small trucking companies can upload invoices that they send to other brokers they work with on our platform and get the money within 3 days, instead of waiting 45 to 60 days on average. This is something that has been super, super powerful. And since this is almost going into the fintech space, risk management is extremely important. And we, because we have a strong relationship with all of these carriers that are using these solutions that we are testing and will be developing, we also have a better understanding of the risk. We have a lot of data, and therefore can do a complete different profiling than someone that just focuses on that specific service. Furthermore, we have a collateral because companies working with us also expect to receive money from us for the services rendered on the brokerage side. If for whatever reason there's something that goes wrong with the factoring side, there's a collateral that we can use to minimize the risk. So super, super interesting. And then the last part is to say, listen, carrier, instead of uploading your invoice and getting the money within 3 days, why don't you generate the invoice on our platform? And as you put all the core data in our platform, why don't you use our platform as a transportation management system? That's something that is still 2-3 years out. When I pitch this typically to investors, they tell me, David, this is an amazing idea. Why don't you do that immediately? It's just, SaaS and software, just much more attractive. Why do we do this, brokerage heavy business? And the answer to that is linked to what I said earlier. It's not only about the technology, it's about tech adoption. You really have to take carriers step by step, starting with what they know, building a personal relationship, making sure that they change the way they work, and then step by step, as they get to know the platform, as they start appreciating the value that technology can bring, then start expanding the service offering on top of that.
And I guess kind of one of the embedded statements in there on usage also is by taking them step by step on the journey, you're also building trust. Because if you think about the owner operator, they live and die based on utilization because that dictates revenue and margin. And equally on the shipper side, they're just trying to understand, hey, are these people we can rely on day after day as we tender freight? And they're able to do it at a reasonable price, but also with consistent service. So it makes a whole lot of sense, and something we continue to see as a theme and trend. But with that, I'd be curious, what is your opinion around LLMs? Right? I think, and I think I can speak on behalf of the entire Dynamo team, that the hypothesis that we're working on is they can meaningfully deliver leverage to service-oriented business models, and we've seen some of that. But I'd be curious, what's your take sitting inside of an organization such as Sennder, what this could do for you?
There's a huge opportunity, but it will take more time than one would think to fully unlock that. And why is this the case? On one side, there is everything related to the challenge related to data, especially in Europe more than in the US. The availability of data in road trade is much more limited. So we're building all the models on data set that is internal and that might not be always fully representative. And with the fast growth and development that we've witnessed and the volatility in the market, always not ideal to train these models. Yeah? So as we become bigger and maybe the market a bit more stable, these models can unlock a lot of opportunities. For example, in pricing and in costing. Again, here in Europe, we don't have DAT and comparable solution that can give you an approximation of rates that doesn't exist in Europe. Predicting also demand could be a second application that we're already looking into based on past behaviors, saying what is the expectation of loads in the future and already start factoring that into the planning of some of our load combination in our system. So there's a number of applications. We're testing, experimenting with them, and it's super exciting, but it's maybe not as intuitive and straightforward as it could be in other spaces, other industries, where maybe data availability and also tech adoption, coming back to my earlier point, are already much more developed.
Mm. To close out this part of our conversation around technology, are there key KPIs you track to kind of keep into account what technology is actually doing or benefiting inside of the business?
Yeah, absolutely. We have 15 key metrics at the company level, and each team then breaks it down to the next level. I think the key metrics that we focus on in 2024 is supported by technology, but is focused on our path to profitability, and it's gross profit. But then we look at everything from automation on how orders come in, how orders are picked up by carriers, the entire back office automation on invoicing, which is extremely important and frequently underestimated. And then we take this to the next tier levels, which is, I don't know, on-time performance, GPS tracking, loads per day for the different teams to ensure that we can measure the efficiency, especially on the loads per day. The headcount efficiency is something that we really focus on, because this is where you can really see the impact on the economics and on the bottom line of a company. If employees become more and more efficient in the 8 hours per day, they can do more and more. And this is where the technology comes into play, as we now have very strong processes. And this is where now we need technology to keep pushing these efficiency gains as we scale.
Yeah, leverage.
Exactly.
So you mentioned a few moments ago kind of the grand vision, and I would say you're well on your way to achieving this, as being this pan-European player in road freight. And in that process, you've been highly acquisitive. And I would say in our portfolio, probably one of the great strategic CEOs. Talk to us about the importance of that inorganic growth to your vision, and how that's equally important as you kind of think of Europe, right? Fragmented, not just country wise, but culture, language, even regulation. That
Absolutely.
it's important, I think, for us to understand.
So we did a number of acquisition. The first few acquisitions were um, acquisitions of digital freight brokers. The most prominent one is Uber Freight Europe. And
Yeah.
this helped us consolidate the market, bring strong talent to Sender, and also get access to shippers that otherwise would have taken us probably many years to get into, especially in certain geographies where we acquired, for example, Everroad in France. And we also got access to new volumes that we could combine with our own volumes to optimize. And as we realized that, we said, okay, we still want to accelerate our path to optimization and therefore to profitability. And this is why in the second step, we started acquiring traditional freight brokers, companies that are too small for private equity, but too big for a neighbor to take over when the owner wants to retire. Think about small companies from 20 to 80 employees. Very important, completely asset light. So really old school brokers that were having two phones and connecting shippers and carriers in between with an Excel sheet. And we did a couple of these acquisitions as well to increase the volume density. Most of these traditional freight brokers are focused on specific geographies and are typically the market leader in specific corridors. And this is by bringing them on board, we can quickly expand the liquidity and the volume density in certain corridors and use our technology to make the entire process more transparent, more automated, and make sure that we can grow with the same headcount significantly beyond what these companies have been generating today. There's still some challenges associated with this, which is the integration. The average age of these traditional freight brokers definitely higher. It's a different mindset. This is where the complications sometimes happen in the post-merger integration process. But when I think about the future, it's still on our roadmap because we saw that once you overcome this integration, there is a lot of synergy. These are companies, by the way, that are also very profitable, and therefore we can make more profitable. So there's also a very interesting strategic angle on that front. And when I think about geographies where we're not present yet, such as the UK and then Scandinavian markets, and this is where M&A could be a very interesting option for the expansion because it's market that are more local, and if we go with a greenfield operation, would take significantly longer to build up the presence and the liquidity that we would need to run fully profitably. And this is why also going forward, we're still looking into a few potential acquisitions.
Amazing. So with that, I'm going to bring us home here. Separate from Sender, right? What are areas around European freight that you're most excited by? You've scaled this 1,000 person organization. There are probably issues that you see even kind of internally that are systemic, but just kind of broadly speaking, what are the types of things in freight that are unsolved?
There are two technologies that I find very exciting. One is battery electric trucks, vehicles, BEVs, and the other one is autonomous trucks. And I think that in Europe we're looking at slightly different timelines for a number of reasons. But both of these technologies will lead to a number of large players, from truck manufacturers to large brokers, to have to fully reinvent the business model. I think the autonomous future in the US will look very similar to the one in Europe. But when you understand that once trucks can travel end to end, and might be 30, 40, 50 years from now, all of these small family-owned trucking companies that today make up 70 to 80% of the supply, 70% of all trucks are owned by companies that have fewer than 10 trucks in Europe. These companies will have to also reinvent themselves or phase out. And this is when you think about, for example, truck manufacturer and ask them, hey, who are your customers in 20, 30 years down the road? And they probably struggle to answer that question because those that are buying the trucks today will probably not be present in the future where these autonomous trucks will travel. Now, the next question is then bringing this future closer to today, when we're going to see this technology be applied commercially on roads. And I think that from a technology perspective, we are there, or we are almost there when it comes to autonomous. If you go to ports, if you go to mines, you already see autonomous trucks moving stuff around every single day. So for me, the timeline will not be dictated by the technology, but will be dictated by policymakers. And my prediction for Europe is that one day we're going to be waking up and reading on all the big newspapers here in Europe that there's no milk in supermarkets any longer available because there's a lack of truck drivers. This is a big challenge that Europe has more than the US. We're missing a few 100,000 truck drivers at the moment. The Ukraine crisis or war did not help in getting. I can tell you in Berlin, there's still restaurants that are open only 3 to 4 days per week because the restaurants struggle to find waiters to run the operation. And since truck driving is a very tough job, and since a lot of young people prefer alternatives such as maybe being a waiter, they still make a bit less but have a better work-life balance. My prediction is that sooner or later, as truck drivers retire and new, let's say, people joining the labor market will try to avoid this very tough job because maybe a preference over work-life balance, that sooner or later we're going to be hitting this breaking point where policy makers will have to intervene. And this is when then I think on the long distance from highway entry to highway exit, we're going to see autonomous trucks. And for the last trucking mile, we're going to still have traditional truck drivers, aging population that will then pick up the trailer, drive it to the warehouse and then back, being able to sleep at home every night, being able to wake up every morning at the same time, and improving their work-life balance to solve the problem that will be there. Now, the last thing that I have to mention is electric trucks. I'm just taking it even closer. Electric trucks are hitting the roads these days, this year for sure. The big challenge with electric trucks is that they cost 3 times more than diesel trucks. So the question is, why would a small trucking company with 3 trucks buy a 4th truck that costs more than the entire fleet without knowing the residual value, without knowing what the true operating cost is, and without knowing is anyone paying a small premium to potentially finance the gap in terms of cost to diesel trucks. Because already today, a lot of players, including truck manufacturers, have to fundamentally rethink the way they distribute trucks. And it's not going to be possible to just sell trucks in a traditional way. Also because the second and third life of trucks were completely different with electric trucks. Today, big fleets maybe buy new trucks, they sell it then to other local trucking companies after 3-4 years, and then at least in Europe, they go east. In Eastern Europe, travel there for a couple of years, and then they probably end up in Africa. Maybe in the US, it's the capacity to move south. But with electric trucks, this will not be possible. On one side, because there's no charging infrastructure in the geographies where the 3rd and 4th life of a truck typically is, and also the ability of these batteries to have such a long lifetime in certain markets will be also much more tricky. So already today, we see a big change that is starting, and big companies that have to find new ways to innovate and distribute these new technologies.
And I will say you did announce recently your JV with Scania that effectively focuses exactly on this, being that partner for the familial businesses and helping them navigate that electrification journey.
Exactly. And this is one of the possible solutions that we're testing, whereby this joint venture offers trucks with a pay-per-use model. So more small trucking company, instead of buying or financing a 300,000-400,000 euro truck, they just pay per kilometer. Everything is included, insurance, maintenance, and so on, except for the cost of electricity. And this minimizes the risk of adopting a truck. Now, there's still a question mark that these small trucking companies have to solve, which is how to ensure that when I drive and only pay for what I drive, I also have a load that maybe pays the premium that I need to balance everything out. And this is where sennder comes in with a second contractual relationship towards these carriers. And this is why we guarantee utilization for a certain period of time, so that when the truck drives and pays per kilometer, it also has a load that covers the cost, effectively minimizing the adoption risk of this new technology.
Amazing. Well, with that, David, I appreciate you joining us here, talking through kind of the shifting market dynamics that we've seen both here in the US, but obviously in Europe, but equally getting an update on your journey in executing to be this pan-European player. So much appreciated.
Thank you so much for having me again, and we're going to be seeing each other very soon.
Yes, indeed. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.